Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to All Things SOPPA. It is, what is today? Today is Tuesday, May the 4th, and we're talking about All Things SOPPA and the slide deck. I'll throw that in the chat here real quick. Slide deck is always at bit.ly/LTC_ATS for All Things SOPPA. This is a continuous slide deck, so you can spend a few minutes going through archives of previous things that were shared inside of the slide deck and find some little nuggets every once in a while in there. Also, all the recordings for these sessions are available on the YouTube playlists that are available on the resource page that I'll share with you as well. My name is Chris Worley. I am the Director of Technology Services for the Learning Technology Center, and your contact for SOPPA in this case, but also do other things with technology, just as many of you do other things with technology when you're not thinking about SOPPA. So this session is really meant for you. So we will have a question and answer time. The main thing I use Slido for is the question and answer, but I also want you to take a minute just to get into Slido and share how you feel about SOPPA, and just the process that we're sharing with people, the things that we're answering questions, trying to do things to help school districts with this process. So if you get into Slido, the value of that is then you're able to ask questions and also upvote questions that are offered by other people as well. So please share those. Go to Slido, share your feelings about SOPPA, obviously, not about other things. But the reason we do that is so that you can get in and then be able to ask questions. So I like those positive, oh, I don't know what blurb means, so I'm not going to ask, and I don't want anybody to define that for me. But better than a week ago, I like that comment. Blah, that could be kind of for the weather as well. But gaining comfort, getting better, those are positive things that hopefully with all the things, all the resources that we share, that is helping with this process. So thank you for getting into Slido, one, for sharing your comments, and then also for being able to ask questions as we move forward here. So good, there's already questions here. Continue to add questions, and also vote those up if you like a particular question over others, and we will come back to those as we finish up today. Usually the first question is for those people that are maybe just checking this out for the first time and learning what SOPPA is. This particular website, the data privacy website on our webpage on the Learning Technology Center's website. I don't know if I said website and webpage the right way either time, but the data privacy webpage on the LTC Illinois website has a section for SOPPA, for Student Online Personal Protection Act. And the only reason I know what that acronym is, anyway, what those letters stand for is they're on my screen. But please check out this information if you're having conversations with superintendents, with your administrative council, with your curriculum people, with your library people, with your technology people. Be sure to utilize these resources to have those conversations and understand the background about what SOPPA is, and also keep in mind that there's other things with data privacy besides the stuff that we're trying to do for the SOPPA law, but also be aware of the reasonable security practices and different resources that are available on this website as well. For each week, we just kind of go down through and look at different things. We look at some statistics for the database and the tools that we're offering up for people to use. And then also looking at the database, looking and seeing what the latest originating agreements are, offer up some tips and suggestions, and then make sure you know where the resources are at for Beyond Today and some upcoming events, and we'll answer those questions. And those questions can be how to do a specific thing within the database. They can be around whatever, as long as it's somewhat SOPPA related. If it's not, we'll push it to the end and we'll try to answer your question as well. But I should start asking questions like, what are you watching on Netflix, as the intro question, so that I can get my playlist built up. So as we look at each week, just statistics, and we started collecting these statistics back in February when we first started doing these All Things SOPPA conversations, and we had 235 districts that had signed up for accounts in the system. Now we're up to 538 school districts that are signed up and have accounts within the system. With that, just the signed DPAs, you can see just the growth over the last month, from 1,176 on April 6th to more than pretty much almost tripled that over the last 5 weeks, as far as data privacy agreements. And those could be one-off agreements that people have uploaded. Those could be originating agreements that somebody's uploaded, or those could be subscribing agreements that people have subscribed to an originating agreement. So a lot of stuff there. Please, yeah, I see that somebody's saying that I'm cutting out. Is that happening for everybody? Kinda, not really, maybe. All right. Because last week we did have trouble and I ended up having to restart my computer. So I tried to shut it.
A little choppy at times, but you're
well,
okay.
It could be that I'm stuttering and that I'm no, it's not that. All right. I'm not trying to say statistics or an acronym. That's the right word. I got it. Yeah, lots of signed agreements. And then the other one to look at, unique districts with DPAs. That means that 203 of the 538 districts have actually entered into a DPA at some level, whether that's a originating agreement or a subscribing agreement. So we're not quite to half of people using the database yet, but that's encouraging to see people continuing to utilize the database. Of the 3,000 agreements that are in there, 356 of those are originating agreements. And if you don't understand the difference between originating and subscribing, you can definitely ask that question, but you can also check out a lot of the resources that we have to explain that process, and check out some different webinars that we've had just recently. So 356 different DPAs are out there, and those could be a version 1, they could be a version 1A agreements, and so they could ultimately be there could be multiple agreements for one particular application, but as we continue to grow, those are good numbers to see. And then I had to actually go to 3 columns for originating agreements that have been signed over the last week. So just a lot of different things here. This is mainly a list for you to kind of go through and just pique your interest and know that there's additional agreements here that are being signed each week, that are available for you to possibly subscribe to. This is a checklist that I introduced in the workshop yesterday. So the workshop yesterday was about going through the Illinois NDPA. Those, the last 2 workshops that we've done on Mondays should be available in the YouTube playlist as we speak. They should have went live at 2:00 if YouTube schedule to public actually works. But this is a resource that I'd really like feedback on. If there's certain things within this checklist, it should be set up that anybody can make a comment on the spreadsheet. It's just a spreadsheet within Google Sheets and if you don't use Google Sheets, feel free to pass this along as well in some other format. If you want to provide feedback, I'm open to that as well. But basically, this checklist is both for originating LEAs and subscribing LEAs, in the sense that if you're creating an originating agreement, you should go through this checklist and just make sure that all these different things are looked at and checked off and appropriate for everybody else that the originating agreement's the best it can be and filled out properly and all those types of things, so that when subscribing LEAs run through this checklist, it's just that they're going through and just verifying that things are the way they are or the way they should be. And then the idea would be that as we are continuing this process, we'll try to fix things that are brought to our attention that maybe aren't exactly right or need a little bit of tweak here and there. But overall, this is to help you both as a originating district and a subscribing district to fill out those agreements in the right way. There's a couple other things on there as well, as far as like file names and just a couple things that are happening and people need to be aware of and those types of things. So check that checklist out and let me know either through the commenting feature within Google Sheets or through email if there's things that need to be added, things that would help with clarification. Those types of things would be beneficial to everybody. One of those things on that list is something that we've talked about before, but just want to bring it to everybody's attention because I have 79 of you, 80 of you, maybe just 79 because maybe I count as one. But sometimes when you're entering an originating agreement, the file size is too big, and I'm working with SDPC to provide error messages and give more feedback on when things aren't going right. But what happens is when you fill out the adding new agreement, it'll just come and you upload a file, it'll just come back to that same screen and looks like nothing happened. When that happens, that means that the file size is too big of that full originating agreement. So there's a couple things you can do. One is upload it through this web address for Adobe to compress that PDF, or if you're using Acrobat, I'm not sure if it's in an Acrobat reader, but you can reduce the file size of that particular PDF to make it smaller. So just be aware if you're uploading an originating agreement that there may be there is a file size limit, and so there's twofold. One is that could be a programming thing, but also it could be that there is we don't want everybody just uploading unlimited size documents, because this is being used internationally in the United States as well for districts to upload their agreement. So space is limited. Another thing that's come up recently, some of you emailed me and let me know that when you clicked on the Illinois NDPA agreement on the ISBE website, that you were getting a pre-filled agreement. And that's because when somebody named their agreement, it was named IL_NDPA _version 1A.pdf. Just as you downloaded it from the website, you re-uploaded it, and there should be a checks and balances for that kind of thing to tell you that, hey, you probably shouldn't upload it as that file name, but by using some kind of format similar to this. I think actually in the checklist I've added including the version number to help with that process, to keep it unique based on the version number of the Illinois NDPA agreement. So I'll update this slide as well, but that's in the checklist. Also, no spaces or other punctuation beyond the dashes and underscores. I think at one point we had an issue with a hashtag or the hash mark being a problem when a school district included that in their district name, like district number 15. If you leave out the hashtag, the number sign, it was working properly. But again, we'll work on getting more better email addresses. I see a lot of stuff happening in the chat, and I'm not really following that real well. So be sure to include those questions, or if somebody can cut and paste those into the Slido as needed. If they're not getting answered in the chat, we can definitely follow up with those in the question and answer session. I mentioned the feature enhancements for the ISPA, SDPC. SDPC is the Student Data Privacy Consortium. That's the international organization that the Learning Technology Center paid a alliance membership to the SDPC, making us the Illinois Student Privacy Alliance for Illinois and for Illinois schools, so that you can utilize all these tools that I talk about in these sessions for free. So you should not pay a membership fee, shouldn't pay any subscription fee for these tools and to use the Illinois NDPA when it comes to these things. So make sure that you're if you come across things, don't be hesitant to add things in there. Duplicates are all right. That just makes it better, because it's more of a need if people see that there's multiple responses. Just like when I was the tech coordinator, the more things that people sent me that the printer wasn't working made me realize that it wasn't just one particular person, it was multiple people, and that there was a bigger problem than just the one person having the issue. So don't hesitate to add those things to the list to help us all make the system better. I provide these slides in here as well, just so you know that they're here. This has to do with the press policy. If your school district belongs to IASB's press subscription, then you have access to these policies. If you don't belong to IASB's press policy, or don't subscribe, I guess is the right way to say it, click on this link here, the Illinois Association of School Boards. It'll take you to an email link that you can email that person at IASB to request those documents. Don't necessarily do it unless you do not subscribe. If you do subscribe, get that information from your superintendent or whoever is the keeper of the all things IASB press stuff. Again, just an additional resource for you to utilize with your teachers if you need to do that. Again, I'm open to people passing along resources that they're using, with having discussions with administrators, teachers, fellow tech people in local meetings or whatever you're also talking about. So pass along those resources as well, and I can make those into a repository and make that available on the resources page as well. And this is the resources page. So just going to click into the resources page just so you can see what's here and what's available. The main thing being the upcoming events to learn more about things that are going on. So the All Things SOPPAs are here, as well as the special workshops that I've had. We're starting to do a couple local in-person events as well, which is weird, but we're getting back into that. And so we're thinking through in-person events as well, one in Morton tomorrow and one in Springfield on the 13th. But also next week we'll go through and look at all the how-tos within the database, similar to the resources that are available on the YouTube channel as well. So be sure to come back to this page and look and see what's upcoming events are available. Also, the resources down here are always important. This is the link I mentioned earlier. This is where you can get the latest agreement. It should be the blank agreement now. It was a pre-filled agreement, as a few people pointed out to me. And it was funny because I kept clicking on it and it would be the blank template. And I was just like, well, it's working for me. Why is it not working? But then I contacted SDPC and they shared with me that the link had been overwritten by another file, which brought up other issues, but I submitted those in the enhancement. So be sure to use that agreement as the latest, some sample communication for you to communicate with vendors when it comes to trying to get an agreement, some different workflows here. A getting started PDF document. I'll just kind of open these up so you can kind of see what's available. So you can look at them at a later time, but just what to do, some quick little things here, contact information for us at the LTC, some abbreviations that may help as you're communicating these different things. So check out these resources. Again, there's a couple different workflows. The US using the Illinois Student Privacy Alliance database tools to comply with SOPPA, managing your agreements. So just looking at these things to help. All things SOPPA are in this YouTube playlist, and then the slide deck for these conversations. And then this is our database or our playlist that includes all the how-tos of how to use the database. And I can't thank Sean Mullins enough, and I know I always give him a shout out, but made these videos for us to share with you guys in this process of learning things. And the latest one we talked about was the auto exhibit creator. And that's worth checking it out, even if you haven't watched the other videos, just to kind of understand what the process is and what's available with that originating and subscribing process. So check those out. And then these last two are the different workshops that I've done the last couple of weeks on Monday. So April 26th, this is the one I'll repeat next Monday, which will be how to use the database system to manage your DPAs, and then also the talked through the Illinois NDPA yesterday, more specifically, kind of running through that checklist and looking at the different parts of the agreement. So those are good places to start and look at those different resources. And then the other part of this webpage is the navigation for working in the database. If you're brand new to this and you don't have an account, then you click on Join ISPA. And if your name is not over here, you can click on this drop down and it should give you a big long list of school districts that have not signed up for an account yet. So if you're one of those schools, you can be sure to sign up through that. And then the login for the SDPC ISPA website is here, which when you log in, you should see the different options for working in the database. And again, that's what we'll go through on Monday at 3 o'clock. If you haven't, if you want to get a full tour of all the menu choices and all those types of things, be sure to check out that video in the YouTube channel or join me on Monday, May 10th. What I was just referring to, adding those resources to the YouTube playlist. So those all should be there. Also, just a direct link to the YouTube playlist here as well. But ultimately, all that stuff's available on the ISPA website resources. So the upcoming events, the Monday that I just talked about, but also I saw on Twitter yesterday, I just happened to be scrolling through the Twitters, and on May 19th, Robin Swartz is doing a webinar on recommendations and frequently asked questions to meet July 1 implementation deadline. So that's not necessarily implementation as far as using the database, but it is implementation as far as working with agreements and vendors and the subscribing process and just the overall legal implications and those types of things. So this registration is directly to the Robin Swartz. I don't really know who's doing the presentation or what anything is at this point, but I saw it on Twitter, and so I wanted to make sure I shared that out with you because it helps give just another complete picture of the whole thing when it's coming from a legal firm. And just for reference, Robin Swartz was part of that original group that looked at the Exhibit G that's part of the Illinois NDPA. And then they were part of the Illinois Association of School Boards, Illinois Council of School Attorneys working group that worked collaboratively with other legal firms from around the state of Illinois to revise the Exhibit G. And that's why we have a version 1 and a version 1A, with version 1A being the newest one and probably going to be used more moving forward for originating agreements rather than the 1.0 version. That's really meant to be just if your district allows it to be subscribing, you can do that as well. Other upcoming events, Be Connected series, talking a little bit about some things that may relate to SOPPA in the sense of security, but also just having conversations, networking, getting to know people. And it's not meant to be a fire hose of information. It's more about sharing experiences and talking about what's working for you and those types of things. So the more people that are there, the better the content is because you're sharing your stories and your experiences. We're also doing a couple of things with IL-TPP and Microsoft to talk more about things with Microsoft. So endpoint management and licensing will be coming up in the next few weeks. And then always, if you're looking for any type of event or any kind of professional development for teachers, for administrators, you can definitely check out those things on the LTC page. And if you're on any of our mailing lists or on Tech Geeks or the LTC community, I kind of put a broad request out there for people to submit proposals for anything technology-wise that you feel like other school people, technology people would like to hear about. That's something coming up on June 15th, 16th, and 17th that is really just about people sharing what works for them. Short sessions, only 30-minute sessions. So it's a good way for you if you've never presented something to get your feet wet and see how that goes, and it'll be over in a half hour. And you can go on with the rest of your day. Okay, before we get into questions, I'm going to answer one of the big questions that is always asked, and that's what about Google, what about Apple, what about Microsoft? And I need to change the slide to include what about Adobe. Ultimately, all these companies are aware of SOPPA. They ultimately meet all the Illinois laws when it comes to everything, all the laws that are on the books. So in a lot of ways, they're all SOPPA ready. It's just trying to figure out how to have a mechanism, an agreement for these for school districts to sign, and for Google to have, or Microsoft or Apple or Adobe to have that agreement in place. So we are, Google is actually involved from a national level. They're actually looking at the NDPA agreement and then the Exhibit Gs from many states that are using the NDPA agreement. So they're looking at it from a wide range of of solutions. I'm working on having conversations with Apple and Microsoft. I've started those conversations, but I need to bring other people in to those conversations. And then Adobe, actually met with them last Friday. Actually met with their one of their resellers that's local to Illinois, that works with IL-NDPA, and had that conversation with the resellers, basically in-house Adobe person. And then she was going to take that information about the Illinois NDPA back and start those conversations if they haven't already started, from a national level. But hopefully we'll have more information about that as the days move on. Ultimately, they'll all be, the only thing that's not going to make them SOPA compliant is actually having a written agreement, and we hope that we'll have those mechanisms in place, ideally with the Illinois NDPA. But if it's not, whatever mechanism it is, there'll be some way, and we'll communicate that out to everybody of how that happens. Or 31 questions. I'm just going to give the kind of wrap up here as far as like beyond today. If there's anything that you need, ask questions. There's a red link down here that says schedule a meeting. Click on that and schedule some time with me. So if you need 15 minutes, if you need 30 minutes to answer some questions and do those types of things, I'm more than welcome to do that. It helps me as well, to understand what your questions are and what they mean, and so that when I'm answering other questions or doing things like this, I have better answers as we go, rather than it depends. Upcoming events, be sure to check out the database tools stuff that we're going to do next Monday. And then as always, all things SOPA next week, and all the resources are in those YouTube channels, or on that resource page, or in those YouTube playlists, and are also part of those PDF documents and all those types of things. So feel free to check those out. And then, as always, with all the recordings, what I've tried to do is put timestamps in it. So as we begin the question and answer portion of this, you can go to that YouTube channel and just click on questions and answers and go right to this part of the YouTube video and listen to it in the background when you're trying to go to sleep or something like that. So we'll just start at the top and work our way down. Again, as questions get voted up, they get moved to the top. So here we go. If the student has the ability to sign in using Google, do we need a contract with the application or site? See, and I already said that I was going to say it depends. I wasn't going to say it depends, but it depends. It depends on what ultimately the purpose is for them signing in. If it's collecting any kind of student information and they're logging into an application or a site, more than likely it's collecting something, and that's the purpose for them logging in. And I see an example of Spotify. Man, Ben. Yeah. It's one of those things that if you really got down to, and again, I didn't stay in the Holiday Inn Express last night. I haven't gone to law school. I haven't taken the bar exam. I do watch Law and Order every once in a while, but so my answers are, I'll just put that disclaimer in there. The thought I have about that is ultimately, and this is not anything to do with necessarily SOPA or whether or not you should have a data privacy agreement, is, and I know this isn't easy to keep from happening, but do we really want students logging into Spotify, Facebook, all these sites with their username for Google? Because ultimately that information, I mean, we all know, if you've read anything about, or if you've watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, you know that there's information being collected and all those types of things. But so the letter of the law probably says you don't need to have an agreement because it's not a K-12 application that is being, it wasn't developed for K-12 is what kind of the law, if you interpret the law that way. Ultimately, that's going to be a lawyer decision. It's going to be a school district decision on how you lock that down and what you make available to log into and what you don't allow to log into. But as far as a contract, ultimately, specifically like Spotify as an example, probably not. But I mean, you can see where the never-ending cycle may begin to figuring out what those sites are, and ultimately another thing that you can kind of fall back on is, and this would be a collective type of thing, is once somebody gets an agreement with some particular site, then we know that we can have an agreement because we can possibly subscribe to that, or at least we know we have a one-off agreement that somebody's entered into. So definitely think about those things, and that's something we need to maybe do better job of providing a mechanism for us to have that running list of applications and why certain people think that they're not being used or don't need agreements. And if we get feedback from legal counsel of why and those types of things, then we can definitely add those things to that database of applications. So I know I didn't totally answer that question, but I think it's more of a thought question than it is black and white, here's the answer. So if teachers use websites like flippity.net or Wheel of Names, does there need to be a contract, or does it count under Google spreadsheets? Not knowing exactly what those are, but if they're just kind of random situations for picking random students, then it's used by the teacher. There's not student information on there. You're not creating a profile for the student of work that they've done or those types of things. It's just, you may want to limit their names, but ultimately, if it was first names or something like that, like if it's full name, you need to think about that, but also think about how the application's working. Is it actually, and again, this is one of those, how much do we want to think about this and how much do we need to think about this? That's ultimately going to be a legal answer. But if a lot of things like extensions and stuff like that, when you are using like a spreadsheet and a Google slideshow, and you're using an add-on or an extension, it's asking for permissions for those two tools to talk to each other. But if at any point that information is being sucked out of your domain, then ultimately, yeah, you would want to know about that and probably try to get a data privacy agreement. But at that point, all these different applications, extensions, how do you find the person that's making them? How do you really know what's going on? So those are just kind of questions that are going to be kind of lingering there, that we're all going to have to kind of work through and figure out, like, we don't really know. So should we be using this application or not using this application? And then trying to find other methods, if there's other methods to do that we do know what's happening. Maybe we can get a data privacy agreement, but it really depends. I feel like the guys from PTAC talking about data privacy and FERPA and all those types of things, because they always answered every question with "it depends." Advice on how to deal with vendors who respond to requests with our privacy policy shows we are compliant and do not want to sign anything specific for us. Ultimately, you can point them to the Illinois SOPPA amendments law and say that we need a data privacy agreement in order to legitimately be able to use their application. Also, they can, if they understood the Illinois NDPA and what that would mean for them, that it's a data privacy agreement that talks about data and how it's being used and what data is being sent back and forth, that if they understood the originating and the subscribing process, it's going to be valuable to them from a national level as well as a state level, that they can enter into agreements ultimately using the NDPA and just having to revisit the Exhibit Gs. Whereas if they don't do something like that and they have a separate agreement, then each school district that uses their application specifically in Illinois is going to have to vet that agreement, review that agreement, and then have their legal team do that, and billable hours and all those types of things. So I'm not answering your question other than use that sample communication template that's on the resources page as a possible explanation of what we're trying to do with the admin I'm reading the chat, with the admin or with the agreement, and what the benefits to them as a company are. Ultimately, if you have questions about specific applications, you can send those emails to me as well, and I'll do what I can to help with the conversation. But obviously, that's going to be very time intensive for anyone to deal with any of that stuff. So, and then I guess the other thing is, with situations like that, at this point, you can just put that on a list and be in a wait and see type of environment. I guess if you pointed out that application to me, just so I know that that's something that people are looking at, maybe there's something that they've already done in another state, or entered into an agreement in some other way, and we can just show them that, hey, you've already kind of done this, and we can help you do that same thing in Illinois. If students go to a website but don't log in, does there need to be a contract if IP information is collected automatically by the website? Not necessarily, and that would be hard to do all that. Ultimately, it has to do with if they're entering any information into that website, student information, first name, last name, building a profile of some sort that would help with track their information, then that's when it becomes necessary to have an agreement. Has anyone had any luck getting assigned NDPA for either Prodigy or Epic books? So I'm going to jump out and just let's just search for that process to see what's the process is for searching for things and where to look. The first place to look, and what I've kind of started doing, instead of looking at all the DPAs, just look at the Exhibit E creator. So that's one way of knowing if there's an originating agreement. So anything in here should have an originating agreement with it. So if I look at Epic, I don't see Epic. If I look at Prodigy, I don't see Prodigy. So let's look at view all state DPAs. So there's not an originating one, but let's just look and see if there's one that is here for that somebody uploaded a one-off or something like that, just to see. So Prodigy. They've listed something here with the following restriction used anonymously. So Prodigy, if they're not logging in, basically that could be used. Epic is not there. Another place to look is under your resources and view statewide new requests. So this is where probably if there's not an agreement, there was going to be further information, or there's going to be other people that are in the same process of looking. So here's one that's put that as the progress. So if I wanted to subscribe to that process, which I already have, I can do that. And then when Olympia changes their progress to something else, I'll get an email to see that. Again, you can see that Sunnybrook sent a request. They haven't updated that progress, so there's no real information there. And I'm not necessarily expecting anything, but I'm also just kind of looking to see what else is out there. So a request was sent 4/19, a request was sent 3/9, agreement requested on 3/18. So just there's other people putting that information out there. It's not necessarily good or bad that you see that there's nothing happening, but at least you know that you're not the only one that's looking for that. And then you can subscribe to those that are there that have progress, because that means that they may be using that progress workflow to and you would be updated when they update it if they do that. Another thing we can do, and just to continue this process, is to search the national database. So really this is done outside of your login and stuff like that. You can do this in a variety of different ways. But if I search for Epic, I can look at this resource from a national level and see what people have out there. And they've uploaded something here. And let's just look and see what that is. So it says that it is an Exhibit E for Epic creation. So that's probably not what we're talking about as far as Epic books. So that's just one way of looking at that. I think I clicked on the wrong window. Another way, let's just look at Prodigy under resources, just to see what's there for them. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right person as well. Again, I can sort by agreement type to see what other states have done. So here is Massachusetts. So they have an agreement with Prodigy. Let's see, Smart Teacher. It was entered into December 2018. So at least that's a positive thing, that we can use this as leverage to say, okay, you've already signed something in a particular state, and then point them to that. Also, something like this that will help is getting information about who to contact if they've done it in another state. So that's just a quick run through that information as a possible answer to those types of questions. So at this point, the answer to the question is no, but if we look at a broader picture and look at the national database and look at some of those things, then maybe there's a little better outlook for that process. What I have been asked, what if a teacher uses a web resource collecting data but loads ghost or fake data into the resource for students to use in their class? I don't know. Again, that's going to be a lawyer answer that we're going to have to get to understand that. Part of this is there, I mean, ultimately, I guess the answer is that's a lot of work to do this, to make that happen. If that's possible to do, then there's probably, and it's anonymized and there's no way of tracing the student back, then it's probably something they can do. But I guess I would just, you still want to know what the applications are. You still want to know that they're doing that type of process where they're ghosting or faking the data from a district level. But whether or not you would need a data privacy agreement at that point, probably not, but you still want to know that that's happening from your district standpoint. Some vendors encompass a lot of websites. Can we have one agreement with the main vendor, or do we have to have an agreement for each site? This has kind of come up a couple different times. There's multiple answers to this question as well. Ultimately, it can be within one agreement. The value of that is that you have to do one agreement as the originating district, and so that's a benefit to you. But when you have schools that are subscribing to that agreement, then you may have all these sites that are confusing the process as far as what is actually being used by the district and those types of things. So I could see you doing it both ways. Having separate agreements, ultimately, that would ultimately be the exhibit A would be for a textbook for Pearson, and another, I mean, just those multiple sites that you would have different exhibit A's, but you would list them in the database separately so that individual school districts that want to subscribe to that could subscribe to the individual agreements. So I know there's a lot of work there, on both sides, whether you upload it all at once or you upload it multiple times. But the benefits are, there's some benefits for both of you. I mean, there's benefits that you can list them out individually within your resource listing, or the same thing for the subscribing districts when they're trying to subscribe to something. If all they're trying to look for is one particular application, they can find that application versus looking through something that is Pearson and coming back and trying to pick out the one that they want. Is there an example we can use for parent requests, and how do we show them this information? At this point, that's something that the Illinois State Board of Education is trying to work out with their lawyers and all those types of things as far as a recommendation for parent requests. So that will come from them and have kind of that workflow and what those requests look like and how often they can happen and those types of things. So that should come from the State Board of Education. And Eric Rocky was on All Things SOPPA last week and kind of alluded to that, but there's no timeline for when we're going to get that information at this point that I'm aware of. But they are talking about it, they are working on it, but we don't have the specifics of that and an example of that at this point. And that's part of the law that says that the state board will do that part of the process, that they'll make recommendations for what that parent request looks like. As we go down through these questions, I just want to make sure everybody knows that we'll try to get through most of these questions. But I will record most of it and then post it on the website, so that if you're waiting for your question to be answered, it may be answered down the road. But you're more than welcome to stick around and hang out until we call it quits for today. But we're getting close to the hour, so I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that. How would trials of software that collects student data be handled? Would we need an agreement for a short-term trial? Yes, I think you're going to need some assurance. Ultimately, you need some assurances that whatever you're doing with that trial and that student data, that if you choose not to use that application, that they're going to delete the data or they're not going to have that data. I know that's I mean, will they enter into that agreement? I don't know. Is that a concern if they aren't willing to do that ahead of time? Because if they're not willing to do it ahead of time, like, is it because they're not capable of doing it, or they're just not willing to do it? So those are questions that will be included with that same type of process of, like, will it work on our equipment? Will we be able to pay licenses next year? Will we be able to get a data privacy agreement? And so you might as well start out with that and know, because the data privacy agreement is just about the data that they're going to collect, they're going to use. So knowing that information up front, I know, adds to and I don't say anything. I don't answer any of these questions lightly, in the sense it may sound like I'm just kind of coming off, but I understand the work that is behind all of this. Like, it's not just, oh yeah, you need to have a data privacy agreement. I know that there's processes and all those types of things, that it's not as easy as just snapping your fingers to get a data privacy agreement. But the same thing could be said for, you could look into the database and see what other districts have done with that particular application, and then subscribe to their agreement. So that's something to think about as well. But ultimately, if it's collecting student data, you probably need to have an agreement. Special ed use a program called Embrace. I'm told our co-op purchases that software for the members. What do we need to do for SOPPA compliance? This is one of those that I need to kind of add a slide for, in the sense that, yes, I have seen Embrace in the database in a few different places. So I know that that's starting to happen, that there's a data privacy agreement being entered into by school or by co-ops or whoever's entering into it. But ultimately, my answer to that is, it may not be your responsibility to get a data privacy agreement. There may be nothing that you have to do for SOPPA compliance, but I would somehow reference that, that your special ed co-op or your alternative school or your vocational school uses certain applications, and that your students, they may still be your students, and if they are, that at least you're aware that they're using those programs, and then it's the responsibility of that serving school to have the agreements. But it wouldn't be something that you would have to have the agreements for, but to have that list and share it with your superintendent, and just know that when somebody asks, hey, do we have student data in Embrace, then you would know that you do, because it's being done at that next level of serving school. So how that's listed, what that looks like, I would at the minimum just have like a Google Sheet or something like that, spreadsheet that would have a list of those applications, or the sites that the serving schools, and then maybe they're linked to how they're displaying that information, would be beneficial to you as a district, so that you don't have to track down that information every time it's asked for. And if people are asking, there may be a reason why they're asking. So the same thing could be said for state board stuff, or other things that you upload, like data into SIS. You know that data is in for IAR testing. You know it's being used for WIDA testing. You know it's being used for the PEPT cards for remote learners and their money for meals for each day, and those types of things. So knowing where that data is at, you don't necessarily have to have agreements, but just have that list so that you know, so that your administration knows. If you're asked, like, you don't have to think about it. You can just go to the list and say, yes, we do. It's right here. If a student using their student email address to sign up for newsletters, do we need a contract with the application and site? Again, that's going to be one of those things that ultimately, no. You probably don't need to have an agreement, but I guess ultimately you're going to need to know, do you really want students doing that? What kind of newsletter would it be? Those types of things. Like that to me is more of a digital citizenship type of thing. Like, should they be using their school email address for certain things like that? And then I guess that's ultimately a legal question, but more than likely the website isn't going to be creating a profile on them. But I guess ultimately if they're sharing their email address, there may be some questions about that. And I feel like I don't answer any questions, but but at some point it's just helpful to think about this. And so could it be prevented? Probably not. But I guess it's just one of those questions to think about. And it's good that you're asking those questions, because those are the types of questions that we probably need to be having those conversations around, and maybe bringing those up to lawyers and legislators that created this law. Has anyone compiled a list of third-party vendors, operators that they can share? Is there additional information of what? There's a lot of different directions we could go with that question. If you're still on the call, if you want to unmute and share that, you can do that. Some DPAs have Exhibit E checked, but then they don't show the Exhibit E. When auto-generating the error out, can that be corrected? Ultimately, it can be corrected. If you, with anything that you see in the database, if there's something that you're questioning, don't just subscribe to it, or just don't do the auto Exhibit E. Point that out to us. We can help with trying to coordinate those activities with the school district, rather than 100 schools reaching out to a school person that's trying to manage all this stuff. I don't really want that to happen, but I'd rather 100 people email me, and then I could coordinate with that one person versus the other way. So use us as the middle person for that, and we'll try to figure that out. But if I knew what the application was and I knew what the school district was, then I can help with that information. Yeah, we kind of answered that question. Do contacts have to be added to Learn Platform and STPC database? They don't have to be added anywhere ultimately. You have to display them on your website in some form or fashion. The value of putting them in STPC is that if they're an originating agreement, then they could be subscribed to by other districts. If and the process links them together within the STPC database. If you're using a system like Learn Platform, I don't really know specifically how they handle the uploading of agreements. I know they have they're utilizing the STPC API that pulls information from the database into their system, as far as like links to agreements and stuff like that. But ultimately, then you would be responsible for, depending on where you're displaying that information, making sure that that's being linked properly and all those types of things. So I don't know if they have to be added to the Learn Platform system in order to show up in Learn Platform, or if you added them to the SDPC and subscribe to it, if it would be there. But if it's an originating agreement and you uploaded it to Learn Platform, people in SDPC wouldn't be able to see it. So that relationship doesn't work. And that doesn't work for if you uploaded it to Google Drive and put a website that you had an originating agreement, people wouldn't be able to subscribe to it and wouldn't be able to find it necessarily. So there wouldn't be that. That would be for any kind of application, whether it's Learn Platform or Education Framework or Catch On or just using like a Google spreadsheet to list out your stuff. So, and I see this question being asked again about the IP address. Ultimately, it depends on what that information is tied to. If it's tied to the student name and tied to be able to be identifying that student, then it's possible to, yeah, that is personal information. But if it's just an IP address on a website that really the student's not logging into or anything like that, and again, it's going to be a matter of the reason for the different answers, maybe just understanding the question and those types of things. But IP address is one of the data elements in Exhibit B in the agreement. But ultimately, that's tied to other student information that may be relevant to the whole conversation. Has anyone been able to get an agreement with Adobe? Kind of went over that in the slides. Basically, we're working with the reseller to communicate with Adobe at this point to try to get that some sort of agreement or understand what their requirements would be and those types of things. Can you show how to enter if H included? I think the question there, I'm gonna assume some things here. Ultimately, if an H is included, what we're, and I'm assuming here, the Illinois NDPA agreement A through G, exhibits A through G are part of the agreement as a whole. Exhibit H is meant to be for things that the vendor wants to include in the agreement that they disagree with something A through G or they want to add something. When that's the case, then every school district that is going to want to subscribe to that agreement needs to review those terms in Exhibit H. Ideally, the way that we want that to be entered, and there's nothing to say that it has to be entered this way, it just makes it easier. When you have a signed agreement, a contract, that would actually be a national vendor specific agreement with an Exhibit E, so that you're the original LEA. The only thing different is that it's going to be a vendor specific versus a national standard agreement. Ultimately meaning that there's an Exhibit H there that says we're gonna, that the vendor says that they need specific terms for their agreement. And then we don't really need to use these two down here because we'll use the Exhibit E creator to subscribe to those. But ultimately, if it does have an Exhibit H, the best way to enter it in as an originating district would be to include it in as a vendor specific agreement. And again, it's not required, but it's just a way for those districts that are subscribing to know that that there is an Exhibit H as another way of triggering that I need to look at that from a subscribing process. It's always interesting to see, and I appreciate people sticking around. 45 people still in the room, and so I'll just keep going as long as you guys are here. I do have a 3:30 appointment, so we'll jump out at that time if we don't get all the way through it. But I appreciate everybody being here. If you do have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. If I'm not answering your question to the fullest of ability, or I've confused you, or I've said things in both directions, call me on it. I'm willing to eat crow if I need to. With filling out an Exhibit E, do we have to have all the information filled in? Example, what we use the software for and the grades used for this. You don't have to do any of that. That is a public facing thing that will show up on your resource listing, so it could be utilized for additional information. And that is really just for how you're using it, not necessarily how the application could be used. So you can make that call on your own to say what subject levels and grade levels you're using it for. So that's a choice that you can make as a school district. Are the agreements still good if the person who signs the agreement leaves the district? That question's come up before and I don't have the answer for that yet. I'm going to leave that one unarchived so we can come back to that. But that's a good question. It feels like they were, I mean, to me, it feels like they were the legal representation to sign it for the school district at the time. And so it should be for the school district, and it shouldn't matter down the road who that's signed for. But that's, again, one of those things that we will have to get answered for later. Some agreement types in the database are listed as 1.0, but are actually the older version. Okay. So I am aware of this. I haven't taken the time to go through and kind of figure out where they're all at and see if there's a way that we can fix them all. But ultimately what happened was March 15th is when we made the new agreement available. People had already been negotiating an agreement with 1.0. They were comfortable continuing that agreement and had that agreement in place. And then they loaded it in the database after March 15th, which at the time that happened, the choice for uploading what type of agreement it was only 1.0A. So any agreement that was uploaded was a 1.0A. And so we have to go back and fix that in some way to make that look better. But we will try to do that so that it's clear. Ultimately, if you open up the agreement, and before you should ultimately open up the agreement before you subscribe to it, so that you know what you're subscribing to. So if you open it up and it's a 1.0 and you can only subscribe to 1As, then either we'll have to enter into a new agreement that is a 1A, or try to find another originating one that is a 1A, and we'll work on getting that the technology or the fields corrected. But we are aware of that, so hopefully that explained what that situation is and why it is that way. Some agreements in the database have sub-processor conduct contracts listed in the restriction section of the DB entry, but not in the NDPA itself. Should these be in Exhibit H? Again, that's probably a lawyer question to really understand where that intent is meant to be. Ultimately, the way the once the law reads, I'm not sure the agreement says this, but the vendor has 5 or 10 days or some number of days to tell the district what their who their subcontractors are, and then some people are putting them in different places within the database and we're trying to figure out if we can get that field added to the SDPC database so that we can have a specific field for that. Whether it should be part of the agreement, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. If there is one login for the entire district, does a contract need to be pursued? Ultimately, it depends on if there's student information involved. If student information is part of that, a login, like if it's a tracking, like if you're uploading a file from NDPA or you're uploading a file of student information, like, I mean, there's all kinds of what ifs with that question. So it ultimately depends on how that login's being used and what information's being put in there. Our school uses second step, but there's also a family link. If a parent logs in using a student email, how does that fall under SOPPA? I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the program to understand. If reach out to me, email or schedule a time, and we'll talk through what that application is and see what that means. When I add Exhibit E agreements, it adds them twice. We get the original school and our post to our listings. Reach out to me so I can see what that looks like and understand better what that means, so that I can better understand. So if you're still on, reach out to me about that question. And if you're listening to this on the recording, same goes for that as well. If websites do not collect data, like, do we need to have proof that they do not collect data? Ultimately, that's going to be up to you as a school district, or us as a collective, as a school district or as school districts across Illinois, to really understand what's going on with that particular website, to know that there is no data. We can definitely put that on our website to say, or on your individual website, that this does not collect data. Some people have gone as far, if it's a good vendor and those types of things, to get a data privacy agreement that says we don't collect data. And so then if they did start collecting data, you would know that as well. So if they're not collecting data, then you ultimately don't need a NDPA, or you don't need a DPA. But again, how are you going to prove that? That's going to be due diligence on school districts' sides to know. And that goes for anything that we're using, whether it's an app on an iPad or an apps or extension. Like, how do we really know what's happening? And I think that's one good thing that's coming out of this legislation, is that we are questioning that and asking those questions, and we may not have ever asked those questions before. How do we use a contract from another school district? I have had vendors send back a contract from another school and say I can add on to it. So if you come on next Monday, we'll go through that process. Or Barb, you can reach out to me and grab some time to make sure I totally understand what's going on, and also to see. I know we've had some situations where that's the case, but the actual originating agreement's not into the database yet, so it's not possible to subscribe to it. So if we can figure out those types of things, we can reach out maybe to the school district and find out if they're going to upload that. If not, then we'll have to figure out another way of doing it. 10 more minutes, we can do this. 11 more questions. Some sites we use do not collect data, but students may interact with it in some fashion. Let's use Slido as an example. Would we need an agreement if we use Slido? So if they're not logging in, then no. If they are logging in and they are collecting data, then it's likely that you may need an agreement. Ultimately, again, it comes back to some of these sites, we can look and see what other states have done as far as agreements, to see if we begin that process here in Illinois, to know. I mean, ultimately, if there's student information in an application, wouldn't you want to know whether it's meant to be as part of the law or not part of the law? Wouldn't we want to know that as a district, to know that that student's information is there and what it's like? So ultimately, again, it depends. And sorry, I'm answering that question, but let's I have our contracts in a file on our district site. Do I need to also load these agreements in another location? Not necessarily. I mean, if you have those on your district site and you're comfortable with that particular way of doing everything, then you're fine doing that. They don't need to be in the database. They don't need to be in Catch On or Learn platform or education framework. If you're uploading your district in that way, then that's possible for you to do that. As far as accessing the originating contracts, all those are listed in the, if I go back over here to the auto exhibit E creator, all the originating agreements are here. So if you search for a particular application, you could find it. But if I look at accelerated learning, STEM Scopes is the name of the software. If I look at this agreement, this should be the full agreement with River Trails and accelerated learning. If I scroll down and I look through here in the, primarily want to look at exhibit E. So it wasn't checked up above, but it is filled out here. So this is the exhibit E that people would subscribe to. So this is the top information between River Trail School and accelerated learning. Accelerate learning. Ultimately, this is the portion that you would subscribe to and send that to them. But if you're using the database, then when you create an exhibit E, it fills in that information at the bottom of that form and sends that email to them. So this is the exhibit E, should be the one-page document. So if you review the checklist that I shared before in the presentation, this would be the one-page document that's uploaded as part of the originating process, so that when somebody clicks on subscribe or create exhibit E, it puts that user's information at the bottom of that form and then emails it. So that's the subscribing process. And that's where the uploading of documents into a Google form, Google folder or something, then that kind of falls apart, in the sense that you're going to have to download that original agreement and then link that subscribing agreement to that. And then you're going to end up doing it in both places. And that just creates some different things. Difference between originating and LEA, just a little help to clarify. Ultimately, the originating LEA is the one that initiates that agreement, fills out the full agreement. Subscribing LEA just signs the bottom of the exhibit E part of that agreement and agrees to where the vendor has agreed to do that. So subscribing, the originating gets the original agreement, and then subscribing signs onto the exhibit E saying we're joining with that full agreement. An original DPA is one signed with the district, correct? What is a subscription then? So just answered that. Chris, can we go through the workflow on the SDPC site when you are ready to either start an originating DPA or subscribe to a DPA? Ultimately, check out the How-Tos and join us on Monday. Otherwise, I'll make that part of, if we got to that question earlier, I would have spent some more time on that. That's the subscribers. If teachers use Avery label templates online, how's this fall under SOPPA? It shouldn't fall under SOPPA if the teachers are using it. If they're creating labels, my guess is that those labels are being created using a spreadsheet and some script that is loaded in your domain, that then is creating a PDF file or something that has those labels printed on it. Or it may just be local to your computer or whatever, depending on what how those are being used. But obviously, if there's other extenuating circumstances, then that could change the whole discussion. But we answered that one. If an existing contract has a section H, how do we go about getting a contract? Do we need to contact the company and get this information filled out? So if an existing contract or agreement has a Exhibit H, the only thing you have to do, if there's an Exhibit E that allows the vendor says it's okay for other school districts to subscribe to this agreement, the Exhibit H, the only conflict that creates is that your legal team hasn't said that those terms are okay. So you would need to get those vetted by your legal team to say it's okay for us to subscribe to that agreement. So if you want to use the Exhibit E to subscribe to that original agreement, you just have to make sure that Exhibit H is reviewed and okayed by your legal team. So, and then once you start seeing commonalities, like if they say it's okay for software A, then if it shows up in Exhibit H in another software vendor agreement, then maybe they'll say that it's okay for you to subscribe to that. So you wouldn't have to go back and get billable hours and have them review each one of those. So that would be my sense for that. And that's why it's important to look at the full agreement that you're subscribing to, not just clicking on the button to subscribe to them. Look at the agreement, take the time to do that. The originating district took the time to do that, so that they got that initial agreement. But it's up to you as a subscribing school to make sure that what you're subscribing to is still something you want to do as a district.